I'm Jacob Winograd. I'm the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute. This is part of our Christians for Liberty network, and I'm coming to you live here in our green room. This is our live show, bit of an unscheduled show, and I'm not going to be at my normal sort of hype or energy that I usually try to bring to this. This is more of a solemn address that I'm doing tonight. I don't have really much in terms of like notes or preparations. I really don't know what I want to say. I know what I want to say, but I don't know how I'm going to say it. I'm trying to just process what seems to be just like the latest in a long string of just tragic events. And there's part of me that always, when there's a mass shooting or a public shooting, that I think rightfully understands that we have to contextualize things, that it's true that like if you assess risk and you assess the rates of violence and you compare it to other countries, you compare it to the place we are at in history, you compare it to other things that like, you're more likely to die in a car accident. Like I get all that. I understand that there is a need to contextualize tragedies that happen, to contextualize evil when it happens, to make sure we don't get too carried away in our emotions, to sort of like a response that's based in something that's distorted, that's, sort of like given into a sort of sensational response, right? Or people might, I guess a term that comes to mind, it's a bit crass, is that like sometimes when tragedies happen, they'll get weaponized and turned into almost like outrage porn. And I'm wary of that. I understand that. But there is also something too, I think, just kind of like the narrative of the time we live in. Like the narrative of just the current events and sort of like the ebb and flow of what goes on in a nation and sort of like as a community of people, and just sort of like the heartbeat of the people and the conflicts and the clash of ideologies, and just sort of like the feeling you have about your fellow, brothers and sisters in Christ, if you're a Christian, the people that you live with in your nation, in your community, and just sort of like what you think you live in when you wake up in the morning and you go to work, or you go to church, or you go to live your life, right? So obviously we're here to talk about this tragic shooting and death of Charlie Kirk, and I'm not here to do any like, I'm not a reporter, right? So I had a meeting today I found out about this while I was in the middle of the meeting, and then I had to immediately go from that to our church Bible study where we talked about it there a little bit. But I've not been on my phone kind of like keeping up with any of the news and reporting, so I don't know that they have the guy. I don't know the details of the shooter. People can let me know if there's anything that they think that I should know in the comments that's relevant to know to what I'm saying, that would change it in any way. But yeah, obviously the passing of Charlie Kirk, and just the nature by which this happened, and just the uptick, at least in very public sort of like attempts to shoot people for politics-based grievances, is sort of what I find to be troubling. And so I want to start with this. And I kind of hate to start with this, but this is just the modern political discourse that we find ourselves in. I didn't agree with Charlie on everything, and to some extent, like, who cares, right? Nobody agrees with anybody on, nobody agrees with anybody that they encounter and talk to on everything. That's normal. That's life. I think one of the great tragedies of our political culture that we live in is that we've gotten so tribal that if someone doesn't line up with you or doesn't like fit in with your group on every single issue, then you almost have to like, do this like caveat of like, well, listen, like, I don't agree with this person on everything, but like, I don't think they're a horrible person, right? And that wasn't how Charlie operated. Charlie welcomed disagreement. He thrived on debate, on discourse. He went out of his way to talk with people who disagreed with him, to be just like almost obnoxiously nice and respectful to people, even when they were disrespectful and very disagreeable back to him. And it's a testament to who he was as a person, and that he was, as far as I can tell, didn't know him personally, and how much can you know about a person just by what you see online, I guess, but by every public record and testimony and fruit of this man's life, he was a Christian. He was a brother in Christ, and he always brought, like, every clip I saw of him, every conversation I saw him do, every debate he was in or moderated, he was always finding ways to bring things back to Jesus. And like, I can listen, there are many things I could point to Charlie Kirk's politics that I didn't like. I didn't like how he was sometimes a little bit too much of a pro-Israel guy, right? And sometimes a little bit too, not, he wasn't like a war hawk, but he would sometimes play into the whole like trope of like West against East and against the Middle East, and kind of giving into certain tropes about the Arab world and non-Western world that is not, didn't, his foreign policy was left a lot to be desired to someone like me, Ron Paulian, non-interventionist libertarian, right? But I could just always respect and love someone who, no matter what conversation they're having, could find a way to bring it back to Jesus, to do public evangelism in the middle of political activism, and that's just powerful, right? I think it would just help to remind us as people that there's something beyond politics, right? There's something deeper going on, and there's something to like the Charlie Kirks of the world that like, even if we don't agree on the issues, we agree on the underlying issue, which I think even in his death is being sort of like, we're seeing the ugliest, latest manifestation of the biggest underlying issue, which is a culture, which is a nation, which is a people who have turned their back on God, who have increasingly left church. Now, granted, there are trends, right? Gen Z, some of the millennials are returning to church or are sort of like changing that trend. But for the most part, we still live in a culture where I don't think America has ever been as secular as it is today. And so the fact that, Charlie was one of those people who was, so like my church is just started a sermon series in Romans, and we were literally talking about tonight that Romans 1:16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation. Charlie Kirk lived that. Like strip everything else away, Charlie Kirk was not ashamed of the gospel. And if you can't find it in you to like just, even if you're not a Christian, to just respect his faith and conviction, like that says more about him than anything else. And beyond that, so I want to also talk about his approach, which I think also exemplifies not just Christian virtues, but libertarian virtues, right? He wasn't a libertarian. He was friendly towards libertarians. He even went out of his way to have Dave Smith at a Turning Point event and be able to kind of debate and represent the sort of like Ron Paul libertarian, non-interventionist position on Israel and wars in the Middle East. And, really like more than most people in his camp tried to make sure that that voice and that perspective was heard. But he wasn't just that way with libertarians. He was always saying this in his debates, at his college tours, and sort of like the man on the street things he did. He would say this, and I'm not going to say this like verbatim the way he said it. He would say it in different ways, and just the essence being that society has two options. That we either live by conversation and persuasion, or we live by violence. And that's it. Like, those are the only choices. Once you've given up on conversation and persuasion as the way to solve conflicts in society. Now, it's one thing to say that, like, in a libertarian society, in a libertarian sense, that, like, persuasion and speech are first, but maybe sometimes there's people who you have to, someone commits crime, you use proportional force to stop them. I'm not saying that Charlie Kirk was advocating for pacifism or I'm advocating for pacifism. What I'm saying is that violence was like the last resort as a means for correcting when people weren't playing by the normal base of conflict resolution, right? That what we prefer, what we normalize is we say, you know what? Violence, the initiation of aggression against people to solve conflicts, is not the way to organize society. That the right way to organize society is persuasion and conversation to work out our problems. And that's why he spent so much of his life and his career on the road, on college campuses and auditoriums and podcasts and stages, because he wanted to persuade people. Let it not be said that, like, I know that it's like he's almost like the anti Steven Crowder, right? Because Steven Crowder had the the meme that like changed my mind. Charlie Kirk was more like the let me change your mind. Like, that was the Charlie Kirk meme, right? He wanted to persuade people. He wanted to engage in dialogue. He believed that talking out disagreements and talking to people was better than fighting them. And that's something that, as libertarians and as Christians, that should resonate with us. Like that is what Jesus modeled for us, right? Like, Jesus came to earth and sort of subverted the expectations of the Hebrews who were expecting a Messiah to come and to establish a new Davidic kingdom, to restore the kingdom of Israel by force and kick out the Romans. But Jesus came to build a different type of kingdom, right? One that's not built on conquest and violence and politics. One that ultimately wasn't even fighting an earthly battle, right? That's fighting a spiritual battle. He came not to slay earthly empires, but to not free us from just human oppression, but to free us from the oppression of sin. But the way he told his apostles to operate was not to be like Gentile kingdoms, to find positions of power to rule and lord over people, but rather to be servants, right? To be the greatest is to be the least in the kingdom of God. And that's what Jesus modeled. That's the biblical ethic. That's what we talk about here at LCI, right? And if I ever had disagreements with Charlie Kirk, it wasn't because I thought his core ideology or ethics or Christianity were necessarily flawed, but it would be criticisms of just maybe a failure to fully consistently apply that to certain areas like foreign policy or even some domestic things that we might disagree with. But the underlying spirit, the underlying ethos and pattern that Charlie acted out and lived out was a very libertarian and very Christ-like ethos. And now we have to talk about the political climate we're in, though. Listen, I feel like for the last couple months, because I voted for Trump, even knowing that he was going to let me down, he let me down way worse than what I was expecting, and I've been trying to sort of clean my own room in a way. Sorry, let me take a drink here quick. Actually, before I get into this, I see there's a lot of comments in the chat, and put my glasses on because I don't have my contacts in. Let me read through some of the comments, make sure no one said anything that I should respond to. Yeah, it feels unreal. It really does. It's my wife was showing me Instagram reels of him with his daughter, and I'm just choking up just thinking about it. I can't even begin to imagine what his family is going through right now. I can't imagine. How do you explain? How do you go to your 4-year-old daughter? I forgot how old she is. She looks like she's 4 or 5. How do you go to your little girl as a mother, as a you know, whoever's telling them, and tell her that her father's not coming home? To try to How do you explain to a daughter just like what even happened, and just communicate to someone so innocent and and little, and try to communicate that kind of evil to them? Yeah, it's unreal. Uh, yeah, and absolutely, uh, justice. I'm going to be talking about that next, because absolutely, moments like this, uh, where we need to hold on to the hand of God more than ever. I don't know. I don't know who, I can't read your minds or your hearts. Those of you who are tuning in, I don't know where all of you are coming from in your walk of life. I will say that the darkness of this world is such that I don't know how any of you who do not have the hope that I have in Jesus Christ can get up every day. Because the darkness of this world and the tragedies of this world are such that if I didn't have faith in a perfect Savior who I know has overcome everything, who has overcome even death, if I didn't have that, if I didn't know that there is no purposeless evil, that all things are reconciled, that the Bible says that vengeance is God, that He will repay, that all evil is reconciled either by uh, the final judgment that is coming, or that it's paid for by what Jesus did on the cross. If I didn't have that to cling to give me hope, I don't know how you would get through just paying attention to the world today, and just even just the normal personal tragedies that can hit you in life. So if this troubles you, and you don't know that kind of hope, if you don't have that light in the darkness, I would just encourage you to reach out in prayer and ask for the Holy Spirit to reveal that hope to you tonight. Fernando, progressives can only progress their ideas through violence. Yeah, that's I'm going to be talking about the left here in a minute, because I have words to say to the left, and I also have words to say to the right. And I'm very emotional, and I was contemplating not doing this because I don't want to say too many things out of emotion, but I do feel convicted to speak my mind. Voluntarian says the shooter's not yet been caught. A manhunt underway. Suspect was apprehended, but he's since been released. Okay, that's good to know. Prayer that the person who committed the act will be caught and brought to justice. Charlie Kirk died upholding free speech and the American U.S. way and the ancient tradition of logical discourse. Yeah, that's important. That is important, and I think I'm going to star that to come back and talk about that some more. Evening, good sir. Luke 6:20 through 26 with our church's gospel today. I feel this verse calls for what we lack today, humility. Let me look that up quick. I have many passages that I at least know the gist of by heart, but I feel like Luke is unfortunately the gospel that I read the least of, which is not on purpose. It might be something I need to correct and read through more of. The Beatitudes. Yeah. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you and revile you and spurn your name as evil on the account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven, for so their fathers did to the prophets. Also, blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. And yeah, again, that's that hope we have. We know that when we are persecuted for because of Christ, that our reward in heaven is great, and we know that uh, though we mourn now, we know that there is hope and that there is joy and that there is a light that shines through that darkness. That this is not forever. God speaks as in my eyes. He joined Socrates and Paul and others who are silenced for speaking truth to power. Yeah, I mean, time will tell what his legacy is. I don't know that I want to. You know, yeah, Charlie. Again, like yeah, things I disagreed with him on. But like I remember just watching clips of him, just with like just some of the most despicable people, just being as nasty as they could to him, and him just like almost like yeah, just like aggravatingly just being like, okay, well, thank you for coming up and talking, and he'd shoot back, right? But he'd shoot back with rhetoric and arguments, but still still thank people and be nice to them. I mean, he was really a class act. Um, okay, there's a lot of comments here. I don't know if I can read all of them, but let's see. Let me see if there's any ones I want to leave before I dive more in. Oh, my buddy Cody is here. This happening before 9/11 reminds me of Harry Brown. With all important caveats made, could there also be an element of blowback against the promotion of statist political violence in this? Yeah, I want to get into that. So that's a good segue. I'm gonna give me a second to blow my nose here. I got a little teared up before, and now I'm a little sniffly. All right, sorry about that. So I take my. I don't like wearing glasses, so I only wear them now when I have to read, and I usually wear contacts. But yeah, so the political climate that we're in, I have things to say to the left and the right, and they're not easy, but I think they need to be said. The left, or at least large parts of it, I don't know if you want to call it the radical left, because it just depends how you define that. I mean, I know left libertarians and left anarchists who would condemn what happened tonight. But whatever you want to call it, there's this portion of the more progressive left that's seemingly growing more and more out of control. And I don't say that lightly, and I'm trying not to paint with broad brushes, but this constant obsession with grievance-based, identity-based politics, sort of mixed with this sort of like modified cultural Marxism, sort of critical theory, postmodern ideology. It's this almost like Frankenstein ideology that's on the left. It's informed by many different, there's many streams that are kind of like flowing into this river of like modern day leftist progressivism. But it is just poison to our public square, to our nation. And it is normalized behavior that used to be unthinkable. And what I don't want to say here is to like, I'm a libertarian, right? I'm an anarcho-capitalist, and it's not lost on me that there are policies supported by those on the right that have consequences that lead to the deaths of innocent people. Because I do know that is where some people want to take this. That they want to say that, well, maybe Charlie Kirk shouldn't have been shot because political violence is bad. But that this is almost like a sort of, like Cody said, like a blowback because he advocated for policies that, he was pro-closed borders and deportations. And so, this led to, victimizing innocent, nonviolent people who were living here. And, with foreign policy, he's a bit of a mixed bag, but that, there's certainly at times where he is defending Israel or America in certain capacities where innocent people were being killed, and just even like basic things, right? The police state, the war on drugs, uh, even just the most fundamental aspects of the state itself are built on violence, right? And so this isn't me trying to like say that like the left is pure evil and the right are all enlightened, right? There are plenty of things, especially in 2025, in you know Donald Department of War Trump. There are plenty of things on the right to be very disturbed by and angry about, and to be calling out and criticizing. And I've been doing all of those things. But there is a difference here, though. And I made this post earlier on X, but like, and if I'm wrong, like, people in the audience, tell me where I'm wrong. Because I would rather be back in my comfortable, happy libertarian land where I just say the left and the right are equally bad. But I'm having a hard time saying that today. Because for as many things as the right gets wrong, I have not seen them create an atmosphere or a culture that encourages this, that encourages the assassinations and killings of political opponents based upon the policies they prescribe. And that is going down a very dark path. Because this goes back to what Charlie Cook stood for, right? That we either have speech and persuasion or violence. Well, unfortunately, right, and this is what the comment that I starred from Godspeed in the chat. He said he died upholding free speech and the American U.S. way. I mean, I'm afraid of what, if you want to talk about blowback and black backlash, I'm afraid of the precedent that's being set here. Right? So listen, let me just finish talking about the left, and then I want to talk about what I'm concerned about on the right. But this is why I left the left. I started out in the left because I want to be clear here. I don't think that all if you're complaining about systemic problems, and if you're doing what could be described as grievance-based politics, I don't think that those things in and of themselves are inherently the problem. I think we often as libertarians are going to see systemic problems. We're going to see problems caused by the Federal Reserve, problems caused by massive inflation, by taxation, by overregulation and regulatory capture, by eminent domain, by the warfare state, by the war on drugs, by the police state. We're going to notice these things and rightly call them out and say that, you know what, like, you can be doing everything right, but the state can absolutely come in and wreck your life. Just, absolutely destroy it. I didn't even mention the intelligence agencies, but, the intelligence agencies can come in and absolutely wreck your life, too. So, there are grievances to bring up. The problem on the left is that they fused grievance-based politics with not only economic illiteracy, which was part of my problem, why I came from the left, because I rightly saw the problems in society, but I didn't fully understand them because I didn't have the economic education and tooling and tools to properly diagnose the problem. But what happened with Donald Trump was the sort of like the acceleration of identity politics on the left, from being this sort of fringe thing on college campuses to being the mainstream sort of like operating procedure and culture of, again, not all the left, but enough of the left that it was no longer accurate to call it fringe, and we saw politicians now having on from the Democratic Party now having to cater to this part of the left and adopt their rhetoric and mindset. And we saw this with Black Lives Matter, and we saw this with the George Floyd riots, and everything that happened from after Trump was elected into present day. I don't know the names. I can't pronounce the girl's name even, but the stabbing that happened the other day. I mean, I'm pretty sure we saw the attacker, basically like happy with himself that he killed that white expletive, right? And we've seen so many people bending over backwards on the left to be like, well, I mean, this is just what happens when people are poor and they're oppressed, is that they're going to rise up and just start, indiscriminately killing, white people. And, like, there's so much here that I want to talk to. There are people on the right who get this right and just misapply it when it comes to Israel and Hamas. Right? Because what they'll say is that, well, we can't have any sympathy for Gaza. Because what they're doing is just the identity politics, grievance-based, like, all of our problems are because of the Jews, right? That's a different situation because Israel was actually a Jewish ethno-state of sorts that actually is, for ethnic and kind of like religious and ideological reasons, keeping a people landlocked and oppressed without their natural rights for, over, I don't know, 3-4 decades, however you want to, chalk up the different periods of time, and doing, ongoing active violence against them. And, for all the talk about Hamas being a terror group, Israel is partly responsible for Hamas being in power in Gaza in the first place. So it's not apples to apples, because there you have actual systemic oppression that's kind of based on sort of like, ethnic and religious identity. Whereas here in America, there is poverty that's caused by the system, and it might affect different groups disproportionately. But what you don't see here in America is white people conspiring to create a, white majority ethnic state, and sort of like doing so in a way where like they're collaborating together to oppress minorities, or especially Black Americans, right? So like when it's like I'm thinking of someone like a James Lindsay, right? James Lindsay will diagnose what's going on the left correctly, but then just sort of like just completely misunderstand the incongruency between the analysis of the poison that is identity based, grievance based politics, that comes from the left with their flirtation with postmodernism and critical theory and the dialectics and all of this. Like, I actually like James Lindsay when he's talking about that stuff. He just doesn't understand how that frame of analysis is we're comparing apples to oranges when we're talking about the history of Israel and Zionism and their relationship with the Palestinian people. So again, all of this has created something on the left where, because of this, it is becoming more and more normalized to, even if there's people on the left who are going to say, well, it was still wrong what happened, that like Charlie Kirk didn't deserve to die, they're going to say like, yeah, but we shouldn't judge the people who are committing these acts of violence, because this is just the language of the unheard and the oppressed. And put it this way, if we saw a bunch of random acts of violence and they were targeting, I want to be careful how I say this here because I'm on YouTube live right now. I don't advocate for political violence at all. I would have a different podcast with a different nuanced take if we saw a rapid rise in politically motivated attacks that were targeting, say, like the IRS or the Federal Reserve or the FBI or, like, the state. Like, if the left was actually, like, diagnosing the problem as, like, oh, we're oppressed by the state, right? We're oppressed by our monetary system and by our tax system and by, like, if they got the diagnosis right and they were, basically, like, revolutionary, saying that, like, political change isn't possible and we need, like, we have to put political, pressure through some kind of, like, guerrilla warfare resistance sort of like thing. Like, I wouldn't even be defending that because I don't think violent revolution is generally the way. I don't think that's the response right now, even though I am an ANCAP and a libertarian. But my critique of that would be different than this, if that makes sense. But now here's the problem. Sorry, let me take a drink here quick. I'm really dehydrated. Here's the problem. And this is where James Lindsay and people like him are getting this right, is that and people like Jordan Peterson have been warning about this for years, that the identity-based, grievance-based politics of the left, the more it's gone unchecked and unchallenged, has now caused a sort of, like, equal opposite reaction on the right. And this isn't to justify it, right? It's sort of like this is sort of the blowback for what's happening on the left, and it needs to be called out and criticized. And I've done that. I have done my own writings and podcasts against Christian nationalism and calling out the Joel Webbins and the Doug Wilsons of the world and the Nick Fuenteses and the, I'm trying to think of other ones. Who's the one who debated James White? That guy's a real Corey or something, Moeller or something like that. I forget his name. Someone can Google whoever James White debated, who's like an open, like, proud, basically white nationalist. Even guys who used to be libertarians, right? Like C.J. Engel, Mailer. Sorry, thanks, Cody. Yeah, but guys like C.J. Engel who are even like, like, liberty isn't possible anymore. We've crossed the threshold where we can have liberty, and now it's just about winning. It's just about us or them, and they're coming for us, and we have to defend, heritage America and heritage Americans, which is basically those descended of, of a white European ancestry who have been here for at least 2 or 3 generations. And I don't agree with any of that, and I call that all out. And what I've said all along is what you've done is become the thing you hate. You've just decided that you're so angry about identity politics that now you have no choice but to play identity politics. And no, that's wrong. You do have a choice. But unfortunately, because I understand human nature and psychology, this is why guys like Jordan Peterson have been warning about this for years, that this was eventually going to happen. This shooting is only going to make this worse. Because now people on the right, and this is already happening, are saying, look, you can't talk. Look what happens when you try to talk to them. They will shoot you dead. That is what Arne McIntyre is doing. That's what C.J. Engel is doing. All the Christian nationalists, all the right-wing reactionaries, they are all out there, and they are, in a sickening, disgusting, despicable fashion, they are using Charlie Kirk's death as a sort of like rallying cry to double down on the very thing that killed Charlie Kirk. They are saying, let's spit in the face of everything Charlie Kirk stood for, saying that persuasion and speech is the way. They're basically saying, you know what, the left is right. It's not the way. They're basically saying that the left, in theory, was justified for what they did because speech and persuasion don't work. It's all just power. I mean, basically, what they're saying is that the postmodernists were right, right? That the the post structuralists were right, like that the critical theorists were right. That it's all just power, and we just have to grab power. And the only way to solve conflict society is just might makes right, baby. That's what it is. So yeah, that's why I felt like I had to do a live stream tonight, because I felt like, I don't know, I don't have the biggest audience in the world. There's 300 of you watching right now. You know, I hope it makes a small drop in the bucket, right? I hope that I'm just doing my part, and I know and I believe that there are others out there who see this the same way that I do, who see the truth of the matter, that which is that, you know, we as Christians, and I think libertarians should do this too, but like especially as Christians, right? We have to resist being overcome by evil. Like, I don't know a clearer example of Romans 12 than what is happening right now on the right. Like, what is happening right now on the right is exactly what Romans 12 warns about. And listen, I get it. Listen, I get it. There is something pernicious about the ideology that's, you know, infected and bubbled on the left. And it's easy to let that kind of like protectionist tribal part of your brain sort of be like, I can't reason with these people. And I'm not even saying, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying I'm some like naive, blind, utopian, or idealistic who just thinks that we can talk with all these people, right? What I'm saying is that we can recognize the truth of the situation and recognize that, like, we might have to adapt. The adaptations are going to look like being careful about speaking in public, and maybe doing so with more security and protective measures, searching people's bags, and that's like an unfortunate thing. But like, if you're going to do public speaking events, you're going to have to be more careful about how you do that. You know, I know when I attended the Rescue the Republic rally, you know, their stage, they had like bulletproof glass in front of a lot of the speakers, especially in front of a lot of the more, you know, like high profile speakers. You know, we as libertarians know that, like, there are ways to protect yourselves, to offer defense, to provide security without relying on the state, without relying on like this sort of like reaction into just like, well, now we're just in total war with the left and it's us or them, and like there's just like these crazy sensational calls of like, you know, we're just going to have to deport all leftists and like, I mean, just things that are either detached from reality or utterly dystopian, right? Like when I see people saying like, you know, the only solution now is to immediately and quickly and swiftly and as violently as possible deport all progressives and leftists. I'm just like, okay, so like you're either not a serious person or you are actually seriously saying that we need to create the biggest police state possible and put Donald Trump in charge of it and literally just go like, you know, full on apologetic fascism, and the state will start prosecuting its political enemies and deporting them, or worse. So I don't like, there's only two options. You're either unserious or you're insane. There are ways to protect yourself. Like, I'm not saying throw caution to the wind. I am saying that there are ways to protect ourselves, to, you know, we still have the Second Amendment. We still have the ability to, with or without firearms, to find ways to protect ourselves and our families. You know, move out of the dangerous cities, right? You know, like move with your feet, vote with your dollars. There are things you can do to protect yourself. And that would be like my first encouragement. My second encouragement then is that on a bigger picture, on an ideological level, that maybe there are individuals who like you're not going to convince to change their mind, like they've been infected with this ideology or mind virus, whatever you want to call it, and like you're just not going to persuade them out of it. But the left got this way by sort of like preaching a message to people and getting into institutions and organizing, and they did this over generations, right? And we can do this as Christians and as libertarians in the opposite direction. I think the problem is this: the right has been losing the battle on the culture war for a long time, and the only way they've started to win it back is by basically playing the left's own game, by just to various degrees adopting an identity politics game. And Trump kind of did that with his populism thing a bit, and that's like a short-term solution to kind of getting back some power. But the problem is now it's like we're in a like now that both sides are playing identity politics, now it's almost like you're in a arms race, right? So you might have like temporarily increased your security, but only at the cost of your long-term security, as now the stakes get ever and ever higher, as they do in democracy, especially when you start playing race wars and class wars. And I'm not a collapsitarian, at least not that type of collapsitarian. I don't want to see society head that way. What I wish the right would finally realize, what the Michael Knowles and the Matt Walshes and the Ben Shapiros and the Andrew Wilsons and all these people on the right have to just we have to be out there. This isn't the time to give up on liberty and say libertarianism has failed. Libertarianism hasn't even been tried, or it's barely been tried. And when it was barely tried, it created like the most prosperous society in the world. And only when we stopped barely trying it and just, smuggled a bunch of progressivism did it start to fall apart. But like I've heard this line from all these people, from the Matt Walshes and the Michael Knowles and the Andrew Wilsons, all that, and they say that libertarians duped the right. Like, how backwards they are. The right duped libertarians, and they've done it multiple times, and they've screwed libertarians over. They've screwed Ron Paul over. They've screwed Rand Paul over. They've screwed Thomas Massie over. They've screwed Justin Amash over. And in this latest iteration, Donald Trump screwed the LP over, you could say, right? Although I'm thankful that Ross Ulbricht was freed. I'm kind of like ironically happy RFK was appointed, because he made half the CDC want to quit, and it's at least like making some people angry in ways that I find amusing. But for the most part, it's not been good, right? The right needs to realize that they can't actually beat the left at their own game. That essentially, like, all they're going to, like, the best case scenario is that they literally have just become the thing they hated. The worst case scenario is that they lose this battle and are just hastening the extent to which we move into a more authoritarian and more total state control society. Maybe if we actually, I don't know, tried the other path, like looking at what was good from our Constitution and of the Declaration of Independence and what our founding fathers said, removing the bad stuff from it and saying, like, maybe we can do better this time. Maybe the solution to identity politics isn't doubling down with identity politics. Maybe it's the right and evangelicals and Christians realizing that, you know what? Maybe the vision of America and the vision of Christianity in the West shouldn't be endless wars and locking people in prisons for, using substances that we don't like, or deporting people en masse because of cultural differences or racial differences or language differences. You know, maybe it's not a giant surveillance. Like maybe actually nothing about the last 40 years resembles libertarianism in the slightest. And so acting like we've tried it and it failed and now we just have to go back to authoritarianism is the most stupid, backwards, brain dead take. And if the right doesn't realize that and they continue to buy into just say, you know what, fine, it's identity politics, grievance-based politics the whole way down, then guess what? What we just saw today is unfortunately going to look like nothing in a year from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now, because the violence will only get worse. So I don't know if I have anything pithy to end on other than that, which is that, maybe it's we as libertarians, I get it. We haven't really won anything, right? And we feel like we lose and we lose and we lose, and then it's hard to kind of keep the energy and passion up and be like, okay, we've tried, but no one's accepting our ideas, right? No, I don't know. That's not what the left did. If we're gonna emulate anything from the left, maybe we should emulate the fact that they kept going, right? They just kept going and going, and they were everywhere. They were in government, they were in colleges, they were in public schools, they were in culture, they were in the media. Let's try that for a change. Maybe if libertarians and Christians started living out our values locally and just doing that while being in as many institutions as possible, what would that do? I don't know. But it's got to be worth trying that as opposed to continuing down the hellhole path that the right seems determined to go down right now. And listen, it's okay to be angry. I'll end on this and then read some comments before I hop off. It is okay to be angry. It's okay to look at injustice and to be angry at the left for the degree to which they have made a travesty of justice in this country. The right's done it too in their own way, but the left has done a lot to kind of undermine sort of Christian and libertarian, individualistic understanding of law and of violence, and to perpetuate a system in which what is evil is called good across many different layers. I'm not saying that you're wrong to be angry and grieved by the injustice, but if you're going to say that the West is best, if you're going to say that Western society is better, if you're going to say Christianity is better, why is it better? What makes it better should be that it's right. And if you're going to say that we're better because we're right, what you're essentially saying is that we're better because on our side is goodness and justice and principles. You're basically saying that we're the ones who have the correct principles. But if you're going to say that we're better because we have the correct principles, but then say, but we can't live by those principles, we have to completely violate and throw away our principles to defeat those without principles, what profit a man or a nation if they gain the world and lose their soul? And at the end of the day, you won't win. You can't drive out, darkness cannot drive out darkness. I think that's a sufficient way to end it. Let me read some comments here before I hop off. At least Department of War is more accurate and more honest. Yeah, fair point. At least, listen, if there's any silver linings of the Trump administration is that they're removing a lot of the pretense, right? kind of easier to to kind of point out the tyranny when they're just kind of like, hey, we're not hiding it anymore. We're just tyranny. Uh, Unfortunately, you're not wrong. Democrats have always are the bad guys. Have always been political violence has always been their go-to tactics from the beginning of the party's history. When I was part of the Democratic Party, like the Bernie Bros, the Young Turks, like the there's a part of the progressive. There's like a remnant on the left, right? Like I saw before I hopped on here, I saw Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks condemning what happened today and defending Charlie Kirk and calling him a great man, and having met his family and all that. Like there are still decent leftists and progressives. I don't want that to be lost in what I'm saying here. It's not all the left, and there will probably always be people who were oriented in that mindset of a kind of more a left-wing paradigm. Like I don't think we can eliminate that from our society, but I don't know, like I consider myself more right-wing, and I call out the radicals on my side, right? Like I say, no, we're not doing this identity politics, racist, white identitarian nonsense. We need people on the left, the moderates and true progressives, to do that for their camps too, right? But right now, the worst on both sides are in the pool and they're peeing in it. Cody said the right is more inclined towards violence through government channels, while the left is going extrajudicial. The exception is January 6th, where MAGA rejected the proper channels of installing an aggressor. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that 1/6 was. I mean, I'm not saying there was no violence on 1/6, but like 1/6 compared to like the average Black Lives Matter riot just kind of pales in comparison. I think you're right that the right is kind of more willing to sort of like normalize or excuse political violence. I actually had a conversation with my pastor about this today, and so like I get it. Like I make the point that like there's something pernicious about like advocating for a law and not considering that what you're advocating for is violence against innocent people. But my point is that there's a disconnect there, and there's something different between me, a conservative, advocating for a policy that we know will result in violence against innocent people, but it isn't them saying like a lot of these people actually wouldn't do it. That was my point to my pastor today. I was like, listen, you might advocate for this policy, but if I told you, all right, I'm going to put a gun in your hand and tell you to go enforce this policy, most conservatives would probably not actually have. They'd either be cowards or their morality would actually kick in and they'd be like, oh, I can't actually follow through with this. So with them, I think it is usually more ignorance. But we do see with the rise of Christian nationalism and the counter right-wing identitarianism, we do see some who are starting to adopt the sort of like left's sort of like extrajudicial and kind of like race war mindset. And so that's a problem. It's rising on the right, but I don't know. There's some overlap there, but I do think there are still some distinctions as well. Let's see here. Yeah, Corey Mailer. That debate is like a drinking party, drinking games material at this point. To be a nationalist, one has to be a white nationalist. I don't know quite what that means, Lord of the Ree. ANCAPs don't want revolution. ANCAPs want complete phase. That's always been my understanding of it. Like privatize everything to me means that like I don't like, so like intellectually the Rothbard button's interesting. It's like, yeah, what if we could hit a button and the state disappeared? I would love it to happen that way. Although if you don't have the cultural change, maybe the state just comes back. But in reality, we either have a phase out or we have a collapse, and we just hope that the stateless society we want arises from the collapse. But yeah, I don't like rolling the dice with society like that and people's lives and families. Um, I think that if we're ever going to, I'm a little gray pilled. Like I'm an anarchist at heart. I'm kind of more practically a minarchist, and sometimes thinking that like the best we're ever going to get is like maybe to go back to the Constitution, maybe make some improvements. But like it's not impossible to have a stateless society, even if it didn't last forever. If you're ever going to get there, I think it would have to be more from a combination of like a grassroots movement where people embrace the ideology in mass, and then you'd have to see sort of like a selling off of public resources of uh, and privatizing of other services and phasing out of things. So that's what I think. The right needs to abandon young Earth creationism, or at least distance themselves from it, because it does make the right sound as silly as the left with gender identity. Yeah, I mean, like to show some compassion to the fundamentalists. It's kind of the knee jerk reaction to postmodernism and to theological liberalism to kind of be like, you're saying there's no objective truth and the Bible isn't true. It's like, no, not only is there objective truth and the Bible is true, but the Bible is so true that I'm going to take it hyper literally in these, you know, read genres of text in ways that the genre never demanded it to be read. So, uh, I bet you Trump will call for more Second Amendment infringements after Kirk's murder. Yeah, that's the other thing. The I didn't touch on, but like the right's call for more gun control in light of all these shootings is another instance of the right showing that they you know they claim to have the moral high ground, but they show that they're willing to be as flexible with principles as the left is at times. Oh, what can you do? What can you do? Yeah, Trump, take the guns first, due process never. Yeah, unfortunately. Christian nationalism is an authoritarian trap, not a foil to woke socialism. I don't know about that. I mean, why not both, right? If I could insert that meme here, why not both? Conrail, I also would like to note that a month or two ago, Charlie Kirk started slightly criticizing Israel, and some have been told he was threatened over it. It's true. He was still loyal to them, but he was criticizing. Like a lot of evangelicals have started to like notice that Israel is sometimes hostile towards Christianity, and they're not happy about it. So, yeah, like I mean, uh, listen, like I like Charlie Kirk a lot more than I like someone like uh, Ben Shapiro or uh, Steven Crowder or some other people, right? Um, it is a matter of temperance by which we shape our lives with the knowledge of inescapable catastrophe. Ludwig von Mises. Mises is like, when you're reading him, you think you're reading poetry almost. When Christ, who is our life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Amen. There are 0 decent slavers in the world. Some are just scared of the cold turning hot. That sounds really deep, Casimir, but you're going to have to help me along because I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're talking about states, that like there are some decent, like not all states are created equally. Um, I would agree with that. Yeah, I agree, Cody. I'd be ecstatic to live in a minarchist society. It would be uh, a lot, But and the thing is, like, if you live in a minarchist society, it's a lot easier to kind of argue for anarchism because, like, you're not arguing. You're like, listen, you already see how much the market handles everything, so like, why don't you just let me go experiment in this community and do it without, the monopoly of law? And if that doesn't work, maybe then we keep going from there, right? So, um, Let me explain the one guy's statement on nationalism. The effort to uphold a certain national identity with state violence will lead to excluding non white people from that national identity. The effort to uphold a certain national identity. Okay, so what is that? So then, because of that, then um, I'm still not following it. I think you're talking about the only nationalism is uh, white nationalism, and so I don't know. I'm still not getting it. The math isn't mathing for me, but it might have something to do with the fact that it's 11 o'clock at night and I'm exhausted. I've been up since 5 o'clock. Um, I think segregation is the only way into core communities that value liberty. Listen, I'm not an egalitarian, and I'm not a like I'm for secession. I'm for freedom of association and discrimination. Like, kick people out of your covenant community who don't respect private property rights. Like, go on ahead, but like that's judging people by their actions, right? Not by the color of their skin or by their religion or and any other characteristics. Like, the only thing that should matter is uh maybe what people say to a point, but primarily their actions. So all right, everybody, I think that's where I'm going to leave us for tonight. I hope that my sort of like impromptu, impassioned speech made a little bit of sense. Um, we can disagree with Charlie on policy. I certainly did at times, but I want to emulate and honor what he stood for: speech and persuasion, and not violence. And I want the right to honor his life and legacy by not using his death as a catalyst to reject everything he stood for. So let's honor him by redoubling our own commitment to persuasion, to conversation, and to Christ. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please make sure you like this wherever you're watching it from. Subscribe if you haven't already. This was an impromptu green room. I had to take a 2-week break, so there was no live stream last week or this week. Next week, I will be doing a show. I don't know if we're going to do it live or pre-recorded and released a couple days later, but I'm going to be interviewing Nikki Philippi, which I think it's how you pronounce her last name. I've read her last name a lot. I've not ever really heard her pronounce her last name, so I might have it wrong. But she's like she used to be a really big YouTuber, and then she got kind of canceled for a couple of different reasons. But still pretty big influencer, and she's become more, she's always been a Christian, but she's become more libertarian leaning. And so we're going to have a conversation about kind of her experience and journey and what, just kind of like where she's at, where we agree, where she might have questions, and, any sort of like wisdom or life experience from the things she's been through, that she might want to share with us. So I'm really excited for that conversation. I'm also going to be having a conversation with Jeremy Kaufman sometime. I think that's next week as well. I'll have to check the date and publish that, but I'm going to be trying to convince Jeremy that we don't have to have a white-only society or predominantly white society to have libertarianism. I don't know. Again, in the honoring of Charlie Kirk and his legacy here, I find Jeremy to be amusing. I think he says a lot of things that are wrong and harmful. But, unlike some libertarians who just want to demonize him and just kind of dismiss him, I figure, hey, he's willing to have a conversation. I'm going to have a conversation. I'm going to see if I can't persuade him and others that there's more hope and liberty than they might think. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. As I always conclude by saying, live at peace and live for Christ. Take care.